The first thing Sergeant Mara Voss noticed when she pulled herself through the cargo bay hatch was the silence. Not the ordinary silence of a ship underway. Not the white noise of recycled air and distant engine hum that had been the sound of her life for 11 years. This was the other kind. The kind that meant something was listening. She floated there for a moment, one hand on the hatch frame, her exosuit's helmet light cutting a pale cone through the dark. The cargo bay of the HMS Ardennes stretched 40 meters forward and 20 wide, stacked floor to ceiling with medical supply crates in their restraint webbing, most of them. The crate at the far end, the gray one that had come aboard at Callisto Station with no manifest number and 2 government seals she didn't have clearance to read. That one's restraint webbing was drifting. Cut, not snapped. Cut with something patient. She keyed her comms. Ewan, I'm in Bay 4. The package has been moved. A pause. She could hear him breathing. Define moved. Define moved. The restraints are cut. The crate is 2 meters from its docking ring. And Felsa isn't answering her bunk ping. Another pause. Longer. Then, I'm suiting up. She heard in his voice what she felt in her chest, the specific weight of a bad situation becoming a worse one. Corporal Day Ewan had been her partner for 6 years across 4 postings. He was methodical and careful and afraid of very little, which made the catch in his breath worth noting. Felsa Ortega had been the Ardennes medical officer for 2 tours. She was 31 years old. She knew more jokes than anyone Voss had ever met and delivered them all with a completely straight face. She had a daughter back on Titan Station named Ines, who was 7, and who had drawn a picture that Felsa kept taped above her bunk. Crayon lines, a round face, the word mama in a child's block letters. Voss kept her light on the crate and did not go to Felsa's bunk. The Ardennes was a Class C medical transport, skeleton crew of 9, currently in high Earth orbit on the second leg of a supply run from the outer belt. She had no weapons. She had no standing contingency for biological containment, because that was not supposed to be what she carried. What she was supposed to be carrying, what all 9 of the crew had been told she was carrying, was pharmaceutical inventory for the WHO orbital stations and a sealed sample container from the Callisto Xenobiology Survey, presumed dead viral material, a standard bureaucratic transfer. Voss had logged the discrepancy when it came aboard. A crate that heavy was not dead viral material. She had noted it in her watch report and received, 12 hours later, a response on official Ministry of Science letterhead that said essentially, "You didn't see that." She had not been surprised. She had been in the service long enough to understand the particular grammar of official reassurances. She had not, however, expected this. She pushed off from the hatch frame and moved down the length of the bay, suit thrusters giving her slow forward momentum, one hand trailing along the supply crates. Her helmet light swept across straps, stenciled labels, the geometric shadows of stacked containers. She did not hear anything. That was the part she couldn't stop thinking about. Whatever was in here with her, because she was certain now that something was, it was not making noise. It was not like the animals she'd dealt with during 3 months on a wildlife survey station in the Martian highlands, where even the things that wanted to eat you at least announced themselves. This was something that understood what silence meant. She reached the gray crate. The government seals were broken from the outside. The lid was hinged and it stood open at 45 degrees, held there by nothing. She shone her light inside. The crate was empty except for a nest of torn insulation foam, and at the bottom, what appeared to be a shed biological casing, a hollow, translucent husk roughly the length of her forearm, segmented, narrowing at both ends. It looked like something a cicada might leave behind, if a cicada were made of cartilage and whatever passed for malice in the animal kingdom. She photographed it automatically, hands steady, because her hands were always steady, and she'd long since stopped giving herself credit for that. She was still looking at it when Ewan's voice came over comms. "Voss, bunk 3. The tone told her everything. She closed the crate lid. Felsa Ortega had not died easily. That was the first thing Voss understood when she reached the crew corridor and saw the scorch marks on the wall, where Felsa had apparently fired twice with a maintenance welding tool in the dark. The second thing she understood was that Felsa had still lost. The third thing, the thing she sat with for a long moment in the corridor while Yuen stood very still beside her, was that whatever had killed Felsa had also spent some time with her afterward. Close time. The kind of time a thing needed if it was trying to learn something. The manifest note said viral sample, Yuen said. He was looking at the wall, not at Felsa. They were both doing that. It's not viral. No, it moves. It shed a casing. It cut restraint webbing. Yes, it did this. She gestured at the room, at Felsa, at the crayon drawing above the bunk that was still there, that had nothing to do with anything, that she couldn't stop looking at. Yes, Yun said. She looked at him then. He was 44, barrel-chested, with a scar through his left eyebrow from a pressure seal accident in 19. She'd known his face for 6 years, and she knew it the way you knew the faces of people you trusted with your life. She knew the set of his jaw when he was running calculations. She knew the particular stillness that meant he'd already made a decision and was waiting for her to catch up. "Where's the rest of the crew?" she said. "Hartley and Brev are on the bridge. Vasek and Chen are in engineering. Lou is in the medical bay. That's everyone I can place. We need to tell them. We need to tell them carefully." He looked at her. "Because one of the things we just established is that whatever this is, it learns by contact. Which means before we call a crew muster and put everyone in one room," she understood, "we don't know who it's already been in contact with. We don't know what it looks like after contact." They stood in the corridor for a moment. The ship hummed around them. Voss became aware of something she hadn't noticed before. A faint chemical smell, something between antiseptic and ozone, clinging to the recycled air. She didn't know if it had always been there, and she'd never noticed, or if it was new. She filed it. "2 suits, she said. "2 suits, he agreed. The Ardennes carried 2 Class 3 exosuits in the equipment locker off the main airlock. They were standard issue boarding suits, heavy, articulated, sealed against vacuum, and rated for light construction work. They were not weapons platforms. They were not rated for any kind of combat. They had onboard cameras, independent air supply, and magnetic boot systems. They also happened to be the only gear on a medical transport that provided full biological isolation from the surrounding environment. It took them 8 minutes to suit up. Neither of them spoke much during those 8 minutes. Voss worked the suit's shoulder joints loose. They were always stiff until the hydraulics warmed up, and listened to the ship, the hum of the engines, the tick of the thermal regulation system, and under it, or maybe behind it, or maybe nowhere at all, nothing. They went to the bridge first. Hartley was at navigation. Brev was running a diagnostic on the comms array. Both of them looked up when Voss and Ewan came through the hatch in full exosuits. Hartley's expression moved from surprise to the particular wariness of someone who'd spent enough time on ships to recognize when something was very wrong. "Felsa's dead," Voss said. She'd decided on the way up that there was no version of this conversation that benefited from being gradual. "There's something loose on the ship that came out of the ministry crate. We don't know what it is or where it is right now. I need you both to go to your bunks, seal the doors, and wait for my signal. Don't open the door for anyone. Not me, not each other, not anyone until I give you the code word." She looked at Hartley. "You remember the code system we set up after the Meridian incident?" "Copper 7, Hartley said. His voice was flat and controlled. "Good. Copper 7. Anyone who doesn't give you Copper 7, you do not open the door." Breve was 22. It was her second posting. She was looking at the exosuits, and Voss watched her process it, the sealed helmets, the weight of what Voss had just said. And she watched the young woman's face do something complicated and then go still. "What does it look like?" Breve said. "We don't know." Breve nodded once very precisely and stood up. Engineering was harder. Vasek was a large man with a loud voice and a habit of solving problems by arguing with them, and he did not take well to being told to go to his bunk like a child while his ship had an uncontained biological incident. He took even less well to the information that Felsa was dead. Voss stood in the doorway of engineering in her exosuit and let him work through it, because that was the only option available. And she watched the large room over his shoulder, the conduit banks, the drive housing, the shadows behind the secondary coolant array, and she thought about the chemical smell in the corridor. Chen had already gone. While Voss was talking to Vasek, she noticed Chen's workstation empty and said, "Where did Chen go?" Vasek stopped mid-sentence. "She was right here." "She went to." He turned, looked at the empty station. "She said she was going to the head." Voss looked at Yuan. His hand had moved to the maintenance torch clipped to his suit's hip panel. It wasn't a weapon, it was a cutting tool, but it was the closest thing they had. "Vasek," she said, "bunk now." "Copper 7, go. What about Chen? Bunk now." He went. She gave him that. He went. She and Yuan stood in the empty engineering bay and listened to the ship. The drive pulse was steady. The coolant fans turned. The shadows behind the secondary array were the same shadows they'd always been. Probably. Chen could be in the head, Yuan said. "Yes," Voss said. Or she found Felsa on her own and sealed herself in somewhere. Yes. Or she's been in contact with it. Yes, Voss said. All of those are possible. What she did not say, because saying it didn't help anything, was the fourth option. That Chen had been in contact with it, and contact with it meant something she wasn't ready to name yet. That the thing in the cargo bay that read DNA and shed casings and knew how to be quiet, that it had spent time with Felsa, learning, and that the person she'd been calling Chen for the last 6 hours might be the reason the chemical smell was in the air. She was thinking about it anyway. They swept the ship from stern to bow, methodically, in their suits, with their helmet cameras recording and the lights on full. The Ardennes was not a large ship, but she had enough places to disappear. Maintenance crawlways, equipment lockers, the gap behind the water reclamation tank, where a person or a thing the size of a person could fold into the shadow and wait. They checked each one. They found nothing. They found Lou in the medical bay with the door sealed from the inside, which was good, and they gave him Copper 7 through the intercom and heard his shaking exhale through the wall. They found the corridor outside Cargo Bay 4 with what they had been afraid to call tracks, but were clearly tracks. A drag pattern in the slightly tacky, non-slip flooring, too wide and too many limbed for any of the 9 crew members. It's moving around the ship, Yuan said. It's always been moving around the ship, Voss said. We've been moving around the ship. It's been watching us move around the ship. A pause. Then, it's learning the layout. It's learning everything. She looked at the drag pattern. That's what it does. It reads things. Biology, behavior, probably. It watched Felsa before it killed her. It's watching us now. We're in suits, which means it can't read us through contact. Which means she stopped. Which means it needs to get through the suits, Yoon finished. The attack, when it came, was not from the direction she expected. She had been watching the cargo bay hatch, which was in front of them and from which the drag marks originated. The thing came from above, from the crawlway access panel in the ceiling, and it came the way things come when they have been patient and are no longer choosing to be. She had a second, maybe less, to see it before her instincts overrode her eyes. It was large. Larger than it should have been given what had come out of that crate, which told her it had fed, and the feeding had changed it. It moved in a way that too many joints accounted for, and not enough of them were in the right places. The head, if it was a head, was smooth and pale, almost luminous under her helmet light, and the face was wrong in a way that she understood was intentional. A poor copy. A prototype. It had been working from Felsa, she realized. And Felsa's face was there in the broad approximation of features, the rough sketch that a thing makes when it is learning rather than finished, and the mouth opened, and the tongue that came out of it was not anything that should have come out of anything. She hit it with the maintenance torch. The torch was not a weapon. It was a cutting tool, 3,000 degrees at the tip, and when she swung it at the closest approximation of a shoulder and held the trigger down, the thing made a sound that she had no category for. Not pain, exactly, because she wasn't sure pain was a concept it had learned yet, but something adjacent to surprise. It recoiled. It hit the far wall of the corridor, and the drag marks on the floor multiplied. Voss, Yun said. He had positioned himself between the thing and the crew corridor. The other torch was in his hand. I see it, she said. She had been in firefights. She had been through the Kepler station evacuation, and the Ganymede lockdown, and a dozen smaller encounters that didn't have names in the official record. She had learned a long time ago that fear was information, and the information it was giving her right now was very specific. This thing was fast, it was adaptive, and the fact that it had come down from the crawlway rather than through the hatch meant it had been watching them decide which direction to watch. It had been doing exactly what she had been doing, running scenarios, eliminating options, choosing the approach with the best odds, which meant she needed to do something it couldn't model. The cargo bay, she said, we're not going to fight it in the corridor. It's faster than us, Yuan said, stating facts, not arguing. Yes. And in the corridor, it can come from above or behind or around the corner. In the cargo bay, there's one entrance, 40 meters of open space, and everything we need to take this ship out of play. A beat. You want to blow the drive. I want to blow the emergency venting system. Cargo Bay 4 is rated for vacuum decompression cycling. If we can get it in there, he said, it'll breach the seals and spread to the rest of the ship. Not if the corridor bulkhead is sealed first. The bay has independent life support. If we cycle it to vacuum, 3 minutes for full decompression at emergency rate. Do you have a better idea, she said. The thing moved. It moved sideways along the wall like gravity was a preference rather than a rule, and she hit it again with the torch, and it pulled back with that not pain sound, and she understood something. It was being careful with her. With them. It didn't want to destroy the suits. It wanted what was inside the suits. It was learning patience, but patience had a limit, and she had perhaps one exchange left before it decided the careful approach was taking too long. She stopped doing the smart thing. She ran at it. It had not apparently modeled that. She hit it at full suit-assisted sprint, shoulder down. The torch held flat against her body to keep the flame away from her own seals, and she drove into the mass of it the way she'd been taught to drive into obstacles in basic. Low center of gravity, all momentum. Don't think. And it wasn't like hitting a wall, and it wasn't like hitting a person, and it had too many points of contact on her suit before she'd even registered the collision. But she was through it. She was through it, and on the other side, and she turned, and it was turned toward her, and UN was behind it. The thing did not have a back. Or rather, it had not yet finished deciding whether it needed one. What it had instead was a seam, a line of soft tissue down its center where the casing had not yet fully closed, and she saw UN see it at the same moment she did. He pressed the torch into the seam and held the trigger. The sound it made then was something she would not describe to anyone who asked, ever. She would say only that it was loud and that it lasted 4 seconds, and that at the end of 4 seconds the corridor smelled like the underside of something ancient being turned by fire, and the thing on the floor was no longer moving in the ways that mattered. They stood in the corridor for a moment. Their suit air systems were running hard. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, she told herself, from adrenaline, though she was no longer certain those were different things. The Ardennes needs to be quarantined, Yoon said. Yes, we might be in quarantine for a long time. Yes. Chen, he said. She had been not thinking about Chen. She looked at him. We check every room. Every person on this ship gets confirmed their suit before anyone comes out. If Chen, she stopped. If Chen is in contact with it, we'll know. How will we know, Yun said. She didn't answer that, because the answer was, they might not know for certain. The thing on the floor had been working from Velsa, learning Velsa, and it had gotten most of the way there before she'd seen it in the corridor light. A finished version, one that had had more time, more contact, might be more complete, might know Copper 7, might know the set of Yuan's jaw when he was running calculations. She filed that and did not say it out loud. They found Chen in the head, exactly where Vasek had said. She was alive and unhurt, and when they told her about Felsa, she sat down on the floor of the head and pressed her back against the wall and cried with the precise, effortful quiet of someone who was trying not to take up space with their grief. Voss crouched in front of her in the exosuit, the bulk of it absurd in the small room, and did not say anything comforting because she didn't have anything comforting to say. She just stayed there until Chen wiped her face and said okay and meant it enough to stand. The muster took 2 hours. All eight remaining crew, confirmed in their bunks or suits or sealed spaces, responding to Copper 7. Vasek wept when he heard about Felsa. Brev asked precise, practical questions about containment and wrote down the answers. Hartley, who had been on ships for 30 years and whose face had the weathered calm of someone who had run out of new things to be surprised by, simply said, "Good work, Sergeant," and meant it. The thing on the floor of the corridor was contained in a sample case from the medical bay and then sealed into a secondary container and then locked in a cabinet in the medical bay with the magnetic seal engaged. Because the official protocols for something like this, if official protocols had ever imagined something like this, probably would have specified something similar, and the protocols existed for reasons, even the ones nobody explained to you. Voss did all of this before she let herself sit down. She sat in the corridor outside Cargo Bay 4, the hatch sealed, the government crate sealed inside, the restraint webbing drifting where it had been cut. And she took off her helmet because the air supply had gone to reserve and the recycled air in the corridor was probably safe, and she was willing to make that bet. The chemical smell was fainter now, maybe gone. She sat with her back against the wall and her helmet in her lap, and she looked at the hatch. The thing had been trying to become human. That was the part she couldn't stop thinking about. Not the killing, not the way it had moved, not even the half-finished impression of Felsa's face. The trying. It had read Felsa's DNA and done something with that information, had used it as a blueprint, had been in the process of constructing something that would pass for human, pass for crew. Pass for someone Voss would let through a sealed door if they knew Copper 7. A thing that patient and that precise had not been designed to be a weapon. Weapons were blunt. Weapons were simple. This was something else. A probe, maybe. A learning instrument. Something sent ahead of something larger to understand the shape of what it would eventually face. She sat with that for a while. Yuan came and sat beside her. He didn't put his helmet back on either. He had a thermal pack from somewhere. Coffee, or the closest thing the Ardennes fabricator could approximate. And he held it out without looking at her, and she took it. And they sat together in the corridor the way they had sat together in corridors and waiting rooms and staging areas and the backs of transports for 6 years, passing the warmth of a bad cup of something between them, not talking. After a while, he said, "Quarantine team will be here in 48 hours. I know they're going to want the sample. They're going to want everything," she said. The crate, the casing. She gestured at the sealed cabinet in the medical bay, 2 corridors aft. All of it. "And us," he said. "Full biological review. Probably extended. Probably." He was quiet for a moment. Then, not looking at her, "I keep thinking about what it was doing. Before we found it. Moving around the ship, watching us, making." He paused, drafts, like it was practicing. "Practicing," she said. "That's what it felt like to me. A thing that was getting better at something." He turned the thermal pack in his hands. "Getting better at being us." She thought about the incomplete face in the corridor light. The rough impression of a human expression, worked from a template, applied to something that had never needed expressions before. The first attempt at a thing, awkward, imprecise, but learning. "It got out," she said. "We stopped it. This one. This single specimen from a single crate, from a survey that's been running for how long, years? In the outer belt. This one." She looked at the hatch. "Wherever it came from, there are more. And they've been watching us for however long that survey's been running. And they sent this as a reconnaissance," Yuan said quietly, "to learn what we're like from the inside, to get close enough to take something home." She leaned her head back against the wall. "And we stopped one, on one ship. The Ardennes hummed around them. The engine pulse was steady. The thermal regulation system ticked its slow rhythm. In the medical bay, sealed in its cabinet, the thing in the sample case was either dead or it wasn't. And she had no way to know yet. And that was something else she would note in her report. Clearly, in the formal language of a person who understood that the language of formal reports was the language that built decisions. She picked up her helmet. 48 hours, she said. 48 hours, Yoon agreed. She stood and put the helmet back on and sealed the collar and heard the familiar hiss of her own air supply engaging. She looked at her reflection in the darkened viewport of the hatch, her face inside the helmet, tired and present, the corridor light behind her throwing shadows she could read. She knew her own face. She was certain of that. She turned from the viewport and walked toward the bridge. She had a report to write. There were things it needed to say very clearly, things that needed to reach the right people and not be routed into a file somewhere behind a seal she didn't have clearance to open. Things about the crate and the seals and the ministry letterhead and the single worm-like creature that had nearly learned to be human in 30 hours on a ship with 9 crew and only 2 people who could fight back. She would write it in the careful, unambiguous language of someone who had been in enough situations to know that the situations that got addressed were the ones that could not be ignored. And the way you made something impossible to ignore was to say it plainly and say it first and put your name under it. Her name would be under it. She settled into the command chair on the bridge and pulled up the report interface. Outside the viewport, the curve of the Earth filled the lower third of the screen, its familiar blues and whites hanging in the black without comment. She had looked at that view from orbit 100 times. The planet that everything was for. The thing worth the 48-hour quarantine waits, and the corridor fights, and the friends lost in rooms she would not describe in reports. She began to type. It had sent one to learn. She was sending a warning back. 2 hours later, with the report filed and transmitted on the high-priority channel that bypassed standard ministry routing and went directly to the Joint Defense Committee, she walked the ship one more time. It was habit, end of watch. Check the spaces. Note what had changed. She checked the sealed hatch on Cargo Bay 4. She checked the medical bay cabinet, sealed, magnetic lock indicator green. She walked the crew corridor. She checked each sealed bunk, each responding ping, each voice that knew Copper 7, all present, all responding. She came at the end of the walk to Yuan's bunk. He had sealed in for sleep. He was a person who could sleep in crisis, another thing she credited him for without telling him. She knocked twice, the old knock, and heard him stir. "All clear," she said through the door, a pause. Then his voice, slightly thickened with almost sleep. "Copper 7. She put her hand flat on the door, the way you put your hand on something you trusted. "Get some rest," she said. 46 hours. She walked back to the bridge. She sat in the command chair and looked at the earth and did not think about the medical bay cabinet or the incomplete face in the corridor or the intelligence that had built it. She thought about the report and the people who would read it and the fact that it existed now and could not be unfiled. She thought about the kind of preparation that came next, the kind that happened when you stopped pretending the Outer Belt surveys were just geology. The kind that happened when you took seriously the idea that something out there had been studying you with serious intent, and you started studying back. She thought about what it meant that the thing had been patient, that it had moved carefully, quietly, learning the shape of human behavior from the inside before showing itself, that it had been making drafts, practicing, and she thought about what it had run into. Two people in ill-fitted boarding suits with maintenance torches and enough years of hard postings between them to be unimpressed by something that wanted to be feared. Two people who had not panicked, had not frozen, had done the work in front of them, and then sat down in a corridor and shared a thermal pack and started thinking about what came next. It had come to learn about humans. She hoped it had learned something worth knowing. Outside the viewport, the earth turned. She stayed at her post. In the medical bay, the cabinet was sealed, and the magnetic lock was green, and the indicator had not changed. She had checked it twice. She would check it again in 1 hour. She was thorough about things that mattered, always had been. It was the habit of a careful person, and she was a careful person, and she knew her own habits the way she knew her own face. The indicator was green. She turned back to the viewport. The earth turned.